Hello everybody, this is Yasmin from Yarkspiri fantasyart.com. Today I am doing a steampunk version of ANUBIS, the god of the underworld, I believe, in Egyptian mythology. Now, the reason why I chose to start off this character just with the body, this part of the video is just about the character itself, not the background, is to show you how I work the background around the character itself, because the focal point is the character, so it has to emphasize the character itself. I'm also using very little dark colors for the initial stages of this as well. I wanted this color palette to be fairly light, and for that reason I'm using very limited colors once again. Now I will spend quite a bit of time on the leg muscles, specifically that leg muscle there. The reason why is because that's actually a really hard angle to draw the muscles in. Well, personally I find it's difficult. I'll often switch between my line art and the actual painting for this because I normally fully flesh out where the muscles should be in the character. So for this reason you will see me flashing back and forth between my line art and actual painting. Now, for the initial design of this character, I did have the character initially holding a sword in his hand, but because he is a god, technically his whole body has power and it could be used as a weapon itself. So for that reason, I actually decided not to actually draw a weapon later on in this character design. Now, because there won't be very much clothing covering the upper torso and certain parts of the leg, I am spending a lot more time in those areas just because I know that the detail will be more visible in that area. So for that reason I am trying to fully work out properly how the muscles would be. Also, one thing you'll notice is, once again, I'm drawing this character initially without any clothes. The reason why is because the character's clothes wraps around the muscles and not vice versa. If your character structure is correct, the clothes will look normal once you put them on top, and they will wrap around the limbs as well. So for this reason I do spend quite a bit of time, even though you might not see certain areas, fully fleshing it out to make sure it's as accurate as possible. That, and it's good practice to do, because it is normally harder to draw a character without clothes than it is with clothes, because there's so much muscle movement and so many details that change depending on the position of the character itself. So it's just good practice to do that. And should I decide to do an anatomy study of this character later on, I already have the majority of the information already there for me. So it's also a lot easier later on if I need to figure out in more detail how the anatomy would be in his character. Now I tend to leave the hands and the feet last, is because I do want to focus on those forelimbs separately. The reason why I focus on them separately is because they should be treated as almost their own characters. Each of those limbs plays a key role in how the character conveys emotions. So for this reason I do tend to treat the limbs as a separate object. Now I'm just quickly roughing out the clothing design that I'm going to be including on this character. I fill it initially in with white so that I could figure out the proper silhouette for the character, so that I'm not distracted by too much detail to begin with. This allows me to focus on the proper structure, how these items would actually wrap around the body, where they would be located, before I actually work out the full details. Once I figured out the silhouette of the clothing, what I'll normally do right after, depending on what material it is, you'll notice that the cloth around the waist has not been painted in yet. It's because it's not metal, it's cloth, so I'm going to focus on that separately. But when I'm actually painting in metals and hard, inanimate objects like that, what I tend to do is I tend to add a lot more textures to those areas. They tend to be more gritty normally. So for this reason, I do treat them differently when I'm painting them. Because I'm treating those areas differently, I am painting them separately from the loincloth that the character is wearing. Now I'm trying to keep with a steampunk theme, so I'm using bolts and other details that you would normally see in a factory type like setting. So the armor itself that the character is actually wearing, although it's not overextensive, has very much a grainy, gritty effect. So it's rusted, it's older, and for these reasons it's not clean and polished. Now I did use a different brush for the metal parts versus the material parts. So for the metal portions I used a very gritty brush, whereas the cloth portions I used the default soft brush. These give me very unique textures and different styles to the items, which helps reinforce that certain portions are actually made out of metal versus other portions. Now I'm actually working out the individual toes, feet of the character properly to make sure that the structure is correct. And I am treating these like almost separate different characters in themselves. It is important that these be structurally correct, so for that I do spend a little bit more time afterwards just to tidy up the structure to make sure it's accurate in what you would actually see. So when I'm doing this, I'm actually looking at my feet in the mirror. I do have reference books with life drawing images. However, sometimes it's really hard to see how the muscles of the feet and the hands in general, how these would react to certain positions. Even though the references I have are very good, they are also still very limited. So for that reason, I do still look at my hands, especially in the mirror, to figure out how the position would be in a real person. I'm also just doing some quick touch-ups on other portions of the body that I noticed were not fully correct yet. So for that reason, I just went over them a bit. Now I did decide that I wanted the character to have armor on top of his hands as jewelry. So although it's jewelry and it's supposed to look cool, almost like claws, I did want it to look almost like armor as well. So it's serving that double function as well. And because the hand is in front of the body, what I did do is I did draw that hand on a separate layer as well. Now, I did initially plan to have the character holding a sword, but it just didn't work for this hand pose. And then I decided, well, he's a god, right? So technically, he would have enough power to do anything he wants. So for that reason, I actually took away the sword instead and just added energy. Now you'll notice the colors changed slightly for a bit. What happened is I was actually testing to see if color balance change would actually give the character more of a natural feel. I did like the way it looks, so I did keep it on a separate layer, but I did turn it off so that I could complete the rest of the character prior to actually turning it back on. Now, as for the head as the rest of the body that I worked on, I work on the basic shape of it first, filling that in with white, and then figuring out with the shadows how the structure would work. If you'll notice, not all my shadows are correct. Most of the shadows are actually there in order to emphasize shape and structure. So it's just a different type of drawing style. It's one that allows me to fully figure out the structure of the character itself. Normally you wouldn't see as much detail in certain areas because it would be in shadow. Because I am trying to showcase the detail of the character, I am using that type of shading process. Now, here I'm just adding some, because it is a steampunk character, I did want to add a tiny bit more details to his helmet piece. And rather than drawing it out every single time, it was just easier for me to duplicate that one object once I finished it on a separate layer, and then hide certain portions so that it did fit behind his head. Now, here I'm actually just going in and adding a tiny bit more shadows in certain areas on a separate layer to make sure it reads correctly. I don't add too much because there's already enough there. And I don't fully have all of the information that I need for from the background to fully finish the lighting. So I just turned back on the color balance layer that I had turned off. And now I'm just adding some additional rust, details, colors to help emphasize the character's shapes and help distinguish certain portions of his body armor versus the rest of his body. So I am once again using a very specific brush for this. All these brushes that I use are actually the ones that Darken uses. You can find them by just typing in The Art of Darken in YouTube and you'll find them. So thank you for watching. This is DK from Minrow signing out.